Welcome to Big Blend Radio with travel writer Linda Kissam, the food, wine, and shopping diva. Welcome, everybody. Today, we are going to get a taste of some of Oregon's most finest wines. We're going to be talking about Ponzi Vineyards. And I have to tell you, it's probably that was an experience and I need more. So very excited to have, of course, Linda Kissam, the food, wine, and shopping diva, back on our Diva Linda show that is every first Saturday. And also special guest winemaker Max Bruening will be joining us, a winemaker from Ponzi Vineyards. But first, Diva Linda, how are you? You're back up north.
I'm back up north on the boat for 6 months, and I came from 100-degree weather in Arizona to 62-degree weather in 4 days, and I like it. I like the cool weather. I like green. There's nothing like Washington State, Oregon, the Pacific Northwest, Canada. It's just big on steroids. Everything is just bigger and better, and that includes the wines. I really enjoy Oregon wines. They're just something very special about them. And in this particular case, with these wines, Ponzi wines, the winemaker has taken some time with these wines, but has not messed with them too much, right? I think if I'm not incorrect, you kept your hands off of them pretty much and let them do their thing, just carefully guiding them to beautiful, elegant, smooth wines with great taste.
They're
one
gentle.
that we had was just wonderful. So I'm really happy to have Max here and share his story about how his wines came to be and why they're so great. And I'm glad to be here with all of you.
And by the way, today we're recording on National Chardonnay Day, and we have to talk about that Chardonnay because that's where we started. So, like when the box arrived, of course, the Chardonnay went in to get nice and chilled, and that box, when you see the box, I felt like Christmas has arrived, and it was a good day. And then I'm like, the box, the art, the wine labels, that paint. I'm just like, okay, this is magic. And then you are scared to open, but you want it. You want to taste this, but you already know that something special has been delivered and you got to take care of it. And then, like, when I think about this with this wine, the difference between really bad water that's been in a hot plastic bottle and it's been old, right? So the water gets like that if you just buy it from a store and those kind of bottles and things. But if you think about fresh water trickling down through a pristine creek in a pristine area, fresh, amazing artisan spring water, that is that of this wine to me. It is from nature. So I don't know, Max, you're working with nature, right? And that Chardonnay was darn good. I'm picky about white wines, and that Chardonnay, I was like, no way, this is gentle.
Well, I love the kind of the story that you helped develop there, and it's pretty spot on in a lot of ways. When I think of like crystal clear fresh water, my mind automatically goes to like minerality, right? And really focusing on the elements of water, the elements of nature, minerality, freshness. With our Chardonnays, that's a huge it's a huge intention for us of really capturing the fruit for what it is and letting it speak for itself, as we are, as Linda mentioned, kind of Sherpa-ing the wine to where we ultimately
like that.
to go, but not necessarily standing in its way. With Chardonnay specifically, there's a huge focus on tension and texture and really involving the terroir in the ultimate, end wine, the end cuvee. So that minerality, that freshness, that's focusing on those, citrus tones and golden hay and capturing, the Laurelwood AVA, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later in the show. But, Louisa Ponzi, who is still very much part of the operation as our legacy winemaker, I've always described kind of the Chardonnay program as what Pinot Noir was for her father, Dick Ponzi. Chardonnay has been for her, and it's really her fingerprint, her impression on these wines. And then over the years, I've been with Ponzi. This will be my 9th vintage. I'd be remiss not to mention our assistant wine grower, Julia Cresto, who is very much part of all of this because it does take a village. We've worked very hard to adopt Luisa's style and then add our fingerprint on it to continue pushing this program forward, always looking, towards what's next and how we can, improve, how we can do things a little bit differently and continue the program forward in the direction that we want to as the winery and from the group perspective. So
that's cool.
That I liked about these wines is typicity. So typicity means that when you drink a wine, an example, a Chardonnay or a Pinot that we had Chardonnay, we had one Chardonnay and two Pinots, that the wine actually tastes like the grape we think it is. So I don't know how many times you've done this, but I have tasted some Chardonnays and some Sauvignon Blanc, and I would say, well, this tastes more like the Chardonnay tastes more like a Sauvignon Blanc, or the Sauvignon Blanc tastes more like a Chardonnay, or maybe some other kind of white wine. But when you taste a Chardonnay that it's a world-class winner. I mean, it's a Chardonnay that you're tasting, and I appreciate that. I don't want to have to guess or have to say, well, I sort of liked it, but I don't think that was the class it should have been in, or something went somewhere. I'm not sure if they added if they blended, or they being the winemakers, or the winemakers did something. But these wines are what typicity is all about. So, good for you. Yay. Yay
what
for
a
us.
good word. That's a good word.
That's the perfect word to describe it. Again, our focus is to really showcase the fruit, right? We're not interested in focusing on an oak program, really. I mean, we use oak as a tool, but the attention is not to mask the fruit, right? And that's kind of going the opposite direction. And so, we're targeting low new oak, between 10, 15%, really selecting our barrels to cater to the fruit, and then also the age as well, because speaking to typicity and just, terroir in general, is we're fortunate as being one of the founding wineries and having some of the oldest vineyards in the valley to really have this selection of Chardonnay that varies in age, right? From the original Chardonnay that went into the estate back in the 60s, which are heritage clones, to the Dijon clones that went in the ground in the early 90s. We have this kind of window into the history of viticulture that we can just kind of pick from, which is pretty amazing. And it helps us in our winemaking to blend these Chardonnay. It's all Chardonnay, but have the ability to blend, from different vineyards, from different blocks to achieve what we're looking to achieve. And every vintage is different, right? With Ponzi, you'll always get the quality, but we want to remain a vintage to vintage variation in style, right? We want our wines to speak to the vintage and continue the quality that we know is there, and it won't go away. But
that's a very good point. And I think newer wine drinkers think that every vintage is going to be taste the same.
Right.
And that was a lesson I learned when I first started. I might have a 2018 and I loved it so much, Chardonnay, let's say. And then I had the 2019 or 20, and it was good, but it was not what I thought of 2018. Can you speak a little bit to your vintage, what that means, how that winemaking comes about?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So we sent you the 21s and then the 19, right? The two 21s were the Laurelwood, and then the 19 was the Pinot Noir Reserve. I'll start with the 19 because it's a fun one to talk about in the sense of a lot of the first and second generation winemakers here in the Valley refer to that as a throwback vintage. So what that means from their standpoint is that it was a vintage that was very characteristic to what vintages were many, many years ago, right? We are much warmer now than we were 10, 15, 20 years ago. And 19 was kind of this like nostalgic vintage for a lot of them because it tracked a lot of the same weather patterns. We had a nice warm winter. There were a couple bouts of rain, not in a bad way. It's let the vines drink a little bit and knock some dust off. But the rains did set in a little bit earlier than they had compared to 21 compared to 18 and vintages prior to that. And my perspective, because I'm not an Oregon native. I moved here in 15, so this will be my 9th vintage with Ponzi. It'll be my 10th vintage in Oregon. So I've been around a long time to see these vintages year in and year out. But what my takeaway is, our vintages need a little bit of stress from somewhere, from some aspect. And the reason why I say that is because when there's a stress or when there's a pressure, it forces winemakers, it forces viticulturalists and vineyard managers all working together to make decisions that you may or may not make, right? Depending on nature and what she gives you, right? So if you're tracking in a beautiful year and you're like, oh, acids are looking good, bricks are looking good, sugar, we can let this hang, but then all of a sudden a front moves in, you're forced to make that pivot, and that translates into the wine, right? And so that's one of the ways that vintage to vintage variation occurs, is decision making, because it's picking a little bit earlier, or you have to pick something a little bit later because you had to bring in a specific block. All of those decisions translate into the wines in some way or another.
Wow, that's cool to think of it that way. Yeah.
Yep. And so 19 was one of those that, the weather was working, but, it got a little bit colder a little bit earlier, and we did have to deal with some rains, versus 21, which, Linda, I don't know if you were in the Northwest at that time, but do you remember those, what they call the heat domes, those wild, heat spells that we got? So, we were going above, we were hitting 114 degrees here in the valley for not just a day, but multiple days. And we had 2 of those, and we were lucky in the respect of where they, when they landed, when they came in. And, with viticulture, there are times that are super pivotal, right? In the progression and the growth of the vine. And when that first one hit, we were pre-veraison. So veraison is when, the green berry turns into a red berry. This hit right before that. So we were lucky in that respect. And then when the later one hit, we had already, gone through, hadn't pulled leaves yet. So we still had that kind of cover from, shading. So we didn't get extreme burning or, what we call just sunburn, or, dehydration. We just got very lucky on when these set. But one thing that we did experience is, because we're completely native here, meaning we don't inoculate our wines. We let them kick off spontaneously, natively. A lot of those yeasts we rely on coming in from the vineyard, on the grapes, on, and those heats, it really depleted those populations. It was great because it eliminated, any kind of powdery mildew or any kind of, things that had developed. I mean, it wiped that out. So we had a very, very beautifully clean fruit. But our native populations were a little bit lower. So it took a little bit longer to get fermentations going. But then once you have healthy cultures in the cellar, then you're good to go. They take off. So
everybody needs a healthy culture.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, no, but it's really interesting about that, because it's kind of like, for the non-winemaker perspective, like I look at it, it's just in life. Like, and Linda, you travel like we do, and we're on the road full time. It's like weather dictates everything. It's like, and I know you just drove up, right, to Seattle. And, the last time we were in Oregon, we pretty much did the state and then went down to Nevada, and we were going to Lubbock, Texas, another grape area. But, I mean, we had detours on I-10. We detoured all the way to Tucson, Arizona, to go up to Northwest Texas. That's how bad the weather got. But all these other things happened from that. We ended up in mountain towns in New Mexico that closed right after, but I'd never been there. We'd gone to all these different things. So we had this whole other experience. And I think that's kind of an interesting way for people to think about wine. I mean, it's like you're detouring accordingly, right? It's like, we still have to get here. So how are we going to do that? So are you guys out there using like weather, like your weather reading has to be like the most important thing almost is watching the weather. So do you use all these technical things like AI and all of that to start helping you with that, with weather patterns, or do you just kind of go, because I don't know, whatever I'm using isn't working because it's never right. I'm always in trouble.
Well, there's the tried and true method of just stepping outside, right?
Yeah.
And looking up. I make the joke that, as soon as growing season starts, as winemakers, as viticulturalists, as vineyard managers, our social media becomes the weather apps, and everybody has more than one. And instead of scrolling Instagram, you're scrolling, the weather apps just to see what's going on. There are weather stations around. Vineyards have weather stations that people will invest in, that will record and cattle or record and basically bring in that data set so people can have access to it. It'll project out whatever the current temps, what the current readings are for that particular area. During harvest, you get a little bit more neurotic with it, because then that starts playing into picking decisions. If rain's moving in, as I mentioned, it kind of depends on when that's falling, because if it's rain that produces humidity would create, disease pressure, potentially like powdery mildew or botrytis, things that directly affect, the quality of the fruit. But, at a certain point, you have to step back a little bit, because it is nature, is what we're doing. And you can only do so much. It's planning. We're all planners, right? That's kind of the nature of the beast. But we are hands-on in the sense of being proactive, if we're watching things.
Do you, like when we the Pinot Noir and the Chardonnay, right? Do either one of those grapes are like, you have to go, okay, oh no, not the Chardonnay, this is going to react differently with this weather versus the Pinot Noir? And even just by them being planted in different areas, is that something you look at according to grape and where they are, their little microclimate area?
Sure. Yeah. And to that effect, Chardonnay is brought in earlier than Pinot Noir, right? So it will ripen early. So when they're ripening, there is a track for that, but we are bringing in Chardonnay at a lesser degree of sugar than we are Pinot Noir. So for example, we might be picking Chardonnay at around 19 bricks. And again, bricks is just a degree of measurement for sugar, versus Pinot Noir that we're bringing in at 24. So from a timeline perspective, you were typically bringing Chardonnay in around that kind of, second, third week of September. That might change depending on the vintage. It might be earlier. But we're also looking at pH as well with Chardonnay, a little bit more closer than we do with Pinot. So there is that window of, when we're bringing in specific fruit, be it fruit for sparkling. So is it Pinot for sparkling? Is it Chardonnay for sparkling? Because we do make a little bit of sparkling here.
Cool.
Or is it Pinot Gris? Is it Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, a little bit of Pinot Blanc? So everything kind of has its own set of rules, quote unquote rules or guidelines that we will look at and we'll follow, and that's completely for myself, Louisa, Julia, to kind of work together to make those decisions and pick accordingly. So
how do you get this sounds, I know there's better terms, I'm the novice here, but I do have good taste because I love your wine, right?
This is where we learn, right?
So. But this is the thing. It's, I think one of the first, I mean, there's the aroma, the scent of the wine, you inhale that, and then there's the taste. And what was really fascinating for Nancy and I as we were tasting them, I said to you, like, we were about 80% what you had on your site. I was like, oh, what exactly is this? But then we have different sense memories from living in different countries too. So that's an interesting thing about wine tasting, is you're going on what and other people may have a different taste just because they've tasted it, right? But honeysuckle kept coming through, but I was like, how did you get honeysuckle? Really lightly. Then this little bit of citrus at the same time. It was like, we're sitting there, and every time we tasted, it was growing with different things. But what got me and I don't know the word for this, is the texture of the
Mm-hmm.
wine. Because sometimes wine can be like thick and jammy, and that's okay. It's what it is. But there was this subtleness to your wine that, like, that's what I was trying to say. Very gentle. What, Lindy, do you know what I'm talking about with this? Where it's elegance, but it's not just elegant in taste. It's the texture of, I don't, because liquid
Yeah,
have texture.
yeah, and I think if you compare the two Pinots that we got, it will sort of speak to what you're saying. So
Mm-hmm.
the first Pinot we got, I'm sorry, there was a reserve Pinot, and then there
Mm-hmm.
was a what I would call a regular Pinot. And you would, if you're sort of new to wine tasting, you wouldn't quite understand why you needed to have a reserve and a Pinot and just a regular Pinot. Aren't all Pinots just the same? No, they're not, and the tastes are different, and your tastes come from how you grew up, all the things you've tasted, all the places you've been. I used to be a director of a wine region in California, and I knew that when press came from the West Coast, the East Coast, when I was on the West Coast, that they would be looking for lean wines, like especially white wines that you find like in Europe, and that are more luscious wines would not be of interest to them. But it's just their taste profile. It's what they sort of grew up on, what they learned to taste, and so forth. So let's talk about the two Pinots that you gave us.
Yeah.
And how they differ, and how one might go to the store and buy both and use them both in the same meal, but for different reasons.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a great talking point. So, the Laurelwood is our flagship, right? And the Pinot that is being sourced for that cuvee is exclusively from the Laurelwood District AVA. It's remarkable in the sense that it's, fruit sourced from vines that have a varying degree of age, versus the reserve, which is 100% estate. And really the backbone of that cuvee is our oldest sites. So Abatina, Madrona, Linda Vista, vines that were put in the ground, back in the 70s, right? And that's really kind of the structure. For me, the reserve is Ponzi's history in a bottle. And that is something that every year, I mean, it will be different because of vintage, but there's just that tried and true Ponzi value within that wine. It is an amazing wine in a lot of respects. But how I like to describe the wines is spring and summer, right? So with Laurelwood, this is our flagship and your kind of entry into our world of Pinot Noirs. It's a little bit brighter, right? A little bit more approachable in the sense of the fruits tend to be more red fruits. So, cherry and hood strawberry, maybe a little bit of, fresh cranberry, but there's still that seriousness on the palate. There's that spice that is very characteristic, or good characteristic of the Laurelwood soil profile of, a bit of, cracked black pepper, or in some vintages, white pepper. Compared to the reserve, which is summer, you've got those tannins that are smooth and silky and kind of dance on the palate. The fruit is definitely more in that black or bluer fruit realm. Those spices, more Christmas, so clove, nutmeg, cinnamon. And that really shows you kind of where those vines are in the soil profile. And this is kind of a good segue. The Laurelwood District AVA is very unique in the sense that it was the first AVA established solely based off of the soil profile. So Louisa and her sister Maria, and the owners of Dion Vineyard and a handful of others worked very hard to pioneer the establishment of this specific AVA, which was established in 2020. So it's relatively young. But they noticed that there was this very unique soil profile because it's only two layers. It's wind-blown loess, which is a fresh water silt, basically deposited. And then there's the basalt, which is underneath. And the levels vary depending on how high you go. And within this AVA, we have the highest elevation around, oh, you're tapping my memory. I think it's around like 1,600 feet. And so the Ponzi Vineyards, all of our vineyards, with the exception of one, the estate, are within the Laurelwood District AVA. And so going back to how this translates, you know, the age of the vine dictates how far it is within this profile.
Okay.
And from that, we're able to pull these beautiful characteristics out of the ground. It translates into the wine. So the deeper they are, the kind of the bluer, the blacker fruit, kind of there's a nice rusticity to it, you know, kind of this elegance that you just can't get with these younger vines. And when I say younger, I mean, we're talking like, you know, 17 years old being the younger. So not super young, but that's a good way to kind of, you know, pair those two together. In terms of food, I mean, both can, okay. So this is where I love these wines because they can be enjoyed with food, right? The Pinots that we make are very, very food friendly, right? We're focusing more on that kind of pH driven wines, still showcasing the fruit, but really being conscious of like, these are things, you know, these are cuvées that we want to definitely enjoy food with. But we also make them where you can enjoy them without food, right? So the reserve for me is kind of that bottle of wine that you open after dinner because it's such a beautiful wine. But it would go great with, you know, a lamb shank or a nice steak or, you know, whatever you know you choose.
It's a special dinner.
Special dinner, yeah, special occasion, right? When the Laurelwood, I mean, you can pair that right up with salmon. Had it the other night. I mean, there's a lot of ways, and most people don't think about that, right? But the oil in salmon pairs beautifully with Pinot Noir, right? That kind of the pH kind of cuts through that and balances it out. So, you know, everything that we do, within the cuvées that we craft, you know, there's intention there, and we try to showcase these wines in a way that people, you know, first know what they're getting, and then two, they can cater their, you know, event or their occasion around these wines. If they want in a little bit more bright, fun, fruit forward, then there you go, your Laurelwood. If you want something a little bit more serious, you start with the reserve and head into our single vineyard cuvées, right? I mean, we've got a beautiful portfolio, and you know, it's just it's fun. It's winemaking. So
I wanted to ask you because I know you come from a background of Michigan, and Michigan's interesting with their wine. I mean, you've got ice wine and all of that. And we've done some interviews with wineries and distilleries out of Traverse City area, and it's pretty fascinating. And then you went to New Zealand, and I have a friend from Santa Rosa area, and he got into winemaking in Northern California. Went to New Zealand. He's like, "That's it, I'm out." And I don't think he's never coming home. He just he's like, well, any place he can go tramping, I'm going. But anyway, no, he loves New Zealand, and he met a girl, and that's that, you know. So the rest is history. But he's really happy, and but he said there was like a connection between the grapes there and then coming up through Northern California and especially into Oregon, which is interesting because Oregon as a state, I mean, people don't realize you've got all that volcanic rock, you've got volcanoes, you've got desert, you've got all of that, right? But I was just want to ask about that with you going. I think that's why I liked your Chardonnay so much too. Is my background is South African, and South African wines have that minerality to them, and I think that those textures too. Nancy and I were sitting there, we were tasting lychees, and who eats lychees all the time? You know, I suppose people do, but that's happening a lot as I'm starting to, the more I taste wine, the more I'm going back to my palate of Africa, because we had so many fruits and I mean, it was the land of fruit. It really, really was incredible. So going through all these different, you know, vineyards and growing wine and or growing grapes and making wine in all these different areas, do you think that helped you with Oregon and where you are now of understanding change, yet at the same time maybe it's kind of similar with the climate?
Yeah, I think, you know, for me it was working.
Well, not ice wine.
I've made ice wine. I've gone and harvested. So I'm originally from Traverse City, Michigan.
Oh, okay.
So I started making wine in Traverse City. I worked with two respectable wineries there, and then went and spent some time in California on the Central Coast, just outside of Paso, and then New Zealand. And I think all, you know, within these travels, I'm a huge traveler. I love traveling. It's totally in my blood. And I knew I didn't want to go to grad school or do like a master's or anything. I kind of took that money instead and invested it in myself and go travel and work in different wineries to further my education outside of my academic studies, which even weren't, you know, they weren't wine specific. I studied microbiome and chem, which a lot is applicable in terms of like fermentation sciences and understanding a lot of the processes. But I was never purely like wine or vit focused. But I knew I caught the bug, and I knew I wanted to go learn more, and I wanted to travel at the same time. And having vintages in both hemispheres helps, because then you can hit multiple vintages at a time. But I think through all that, I was trying to figure out, you know, where I wanted to be. And early on, I you know, had a brief experience with, you know, Burgundian varietals, working with Pinot Noir, with Chardonnay. And I was told very early on that if you can make a good Pinot Noir, then you'll be pretty much successful in making other wines, because they are finicky grapes. They are delicate varietals to work with. And so that was a bit of a challenge accepted. And when I landed the job at Penner-Ash in 2015, that was my first Oregon vintage. My fiance and I moved out here. She was pursuing grad school, and I could continue, you know, doing, you know, the wine thing. I realized one here that, as Linda pointed out, it's big everything. The magnitude of the wilderness, the magnitude of the mountains and the valley and the, you know, the food scene. I mean, everything was just kind of, we were checking a lot of boxes and realized that we didn't want to leave here. And so at that point, coming kind of full circle back to Pinot and working with Chardonnay, you know, developing an appreciation for Chardonnay, because honestly, you know, being candid, it wasn't my focus at all. It was not that I was in the ABC mindset, anything but Chardonnay. I didn't understand it. And I think working with Louisa and Julia really put the Chardonnay into perspective for me of how beautiful of a varietal it is, its complexity, the versatility with that, you know, and the ability to make, you know, beautiful wines out of that varietal, plus the history, the Oregon history with Chardonnay. But going back, I realized that Oregon kind of was home at that point. And in terms of the winemaking side of things, when I went to New Zealand, I worked a very big facility, and I was told by my mentor, you know, he said, you got to go work one. You got to do it. You got to work scale. You got to have a good understanding of the process from being a very small winery, you know, be it a 1,500 or 2,500 case production, to a monster, you know, 100,000 plus case, you know, because the making of the wine, the style is different. There's a core understanding, you know, in terms of fermentation, and every winemaker is a little bit different. But that helped me realize kind of where I wanted to be in terms of production and what I, you know, wanted to be a part of. So Ponzi was great because we have a beautiful facility, and we're kind of focusing between that 600 to 800 ton, which translates to, you know, about 35 to 45,000 case production, depending. And what I love, and this kind of ties into what you mentioned very early on, our style, we are still very boutique in what we're doing, right? It's a boutique style of winemaking in a very beautiful facility with a lot of room to do it in. But Oregon is unique in the sense that we are focusing on small lot fermentations, you know, 2-3 ton fermenter sizes. So it's very labor intensive. It is truly a labor of love of what we do. And you feel it at the end of vintage, you definitely feel it. But in the end, you get these beautiful wines, right? So.
Well, thank you for the beautiful wines.
Yes.
I love
Thank you
it.
for supporting, you know?
I know. So can you tell us a little bit about the experience for people coming to Ponzi Vineyard? I'm saying, Linda,
Totally.
Can't you go south for a little bit? Take the boat south. I think you should go to the winery while you're there. I'm just saying, it's not
that's
far.
a rough ride. That is a very rough ride from Washington down. You have to be very brave, and I'm not.
Well, you might have to do a road trip then.
Road trip is good.
Road trip's good. That's an easy one.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so we're lucky in the sense we're on the north side of the Chehalis Mountains, so we're very close to Portland. You don't have to go up and over and then down, into like the Dundee Newburgh area. So we're about 40 minutes from downtown, open 7 days a week. We don't require appointments, but we are a very popular destination, given our history and our wines, and just the fact that, like I mentioned, we're close to Portland. So, reservation, we suggest to do it. But it's a beautiful property. I think that's one thing that drew me is it's the family had a really good taste in where they bought and planted vineyards, where they set up their wineries and tasting rooms over the years. This is a remarkable site. We have beautiful views in all directions. We have a beautiful estate vineyard here, Avalana. We have an experience here, and we can cater that experience to your needs or whatever you want, be it a wine tour or the different flights that we offer, anything from our signature flight to our collector's edition, so you can really get a taste of what we're doing. All of our wines are available here from the Laurelwood tier up, so Pinot, Chardonnay, and then we also have some fun wines. As I mentioned earlier, we do make sparkling wines. We have a Blanc de Blanc and a Brut Rosé.
Linda,
we do make a still rosé out of Pinot Noir, and we've got a Pinot Blanc as well, which are exclusive to the tasting room. So anybody coming in can purchase from there. But yeah, I mean, we love having people out. It's a great place. We have, inside outside seating. We've got bocce ball courts. I mean, you name it, we can accommodate. So
I think Linda has to go. She likes anything with sparklies. She's a diva.
Sparkles
so if there's something sparkles.
Yeah. Do you have events like a winemaker dinner or
yes,
or dinners in the vineyards?
Yep, we do events. Yep, and for that, because they're always changing, we just refer people to our site, because we do have a page dedicated to that, what's going on here at Ponzi, so people can sign up. We have an executive chef, which is amazing. So when we are doing these events, we have that in-house support, and he's an amazing chef.
I want to stop you there and let people know that that's a really important statement. They have an executive chef.
That's a big deal.
Sometimes when you go to a winery, they may have a beautiful tasting room and lovely staff and wines, but when the events come, they cater in.
Yep.
And it's not consistent. Your caterer might be too busy, the one that you really like, you have to get somebody else or whatever. So an executive chef on staff means that they're working with the wines at all times, they understand the wines, and that your experience is going to be tenfold of what you might get somewhere else. So smart strategy, very smart.
Well, experience, right? So
yeah, I want people to know it's ponzivineyards.com, and also Linda's got an article of her review of the wines up, and you can go to blendradioandtv.com for that. And we have a recipe from your chef of spring nettles. I've never cooked nettles before. I'm like, okay, why not?
And you can forage for them yourself. So especially out here in the PNW. So
yeah. So all the links for the recipe, the article, also for Ponzi Vineyards and Diva Linda, all in goodtaste.info. See, told her she's a diva. Everything must be in good taste. All of them are in the show notes as well for everyone to go and get from there. So, man, I'm thirsty now. I think it's Chardonnay Day. We should have Chardonnay.
9 o'clock, right?
All right.
It's 9 o'clock.
It's always 1 o'clock. What are you talking about? I don't care. Right. I could wake up at 3 in the morning and say, I'm in a really good mood. Let's play some music. I might start writing something, and I might have a glass of wine. I've done that.
I think we'll have you on next year or late this year to talk about your sparkling wine program. That is very interesting to both Lisa and I, and dear to our hearts. And since you say you have the equipment and you have the knowledge, this should be a very interesting topic to go.
We should. Yeah, we should bring in Julia, because she has really, taken, spearheaded that program. She came in 2018, and has really kind of pushed the envelope in that respect as well. And Louise has been making sparkling. Her first vintage was 2008, if my memory serves me, and we released the 14. After years of, because it's always trialing, right? Everything is trialing and experimenting and logging that data and collecting data and looking back at it. But no, we'd be happy to. We can touch on every single tier if you want. Just
we could talk wine all day, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to understand how sparkling wine, or quote champagne, which we can't use that word anymore, came to be in the United States, and how it's different from Europe or the Champagne region. Not so different, actually, but Europe was smart when
especially
they said,
for the holiday season.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes, holiday season is coming up. We'll have to see. This is great.
It is
Thank
really
you very much for coming on and sharing your expertise with us. I thought this is a wonderful program. Wonderful wine.
Thank you so much. I was happy to be here.
Thank you for those awesome wines. I'm seriously awesome. I was like, sit down. Take a sip, and you're like, sit down. But then I kept going, wait, I got to go look at the tasting notes. And then, Nancy says to me, she goes, Lisa, it's not about being right or wrong. You've done enough podcasts on this. It's not about being right or wrong. But it was just interesting because you as you're tasting, you're just like, what is that? And then it's like, oh yeah, it goes with what we were tasting. But our notes were out of control. I can't tell you because I can't read my writing. But
I can little winemaker insight. I know when I'm tasting through wines, when I'm putting blends together, you always know when you've hit a winner at the amount of tasting notes that you have next to it, because some some aren't as intriguing, so it's kind of you go through and you're like, I can't really think of anything, like here's kind of the basics, and then you hit that one and you're like boop, 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 and you just
But that's what I was saying. Every sip there was something. We were looking at each other going, but it's like good music, with really good dynamics. I'm into, you can't have good music unless it's punk, then you can, but the dynamics of music is everything. That's what makes it good. And as a listener, to sit and you want to listen to a song that's really good in dynamics over and over and over, and then you start getting all those little subtleties. But that's the problem with wine. Then the bottle's gone. And then you're like, but I'm not done.
Well, the song's over. So now you got to go start a new song, right? Get a new bottle.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. You take care.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio with travel writer Linda Kissam. Keep up with Linda at allingoodtaste.info. You can read her articles in Big Blend magazines and keep up with us at bigblendradio.com.